My name's Olin Pickens. I left home when I was 20 years old on August 21st, 1942. And I grew up in Dumas, Mississippi, where I was born. And I moved to Blue Mountain after I left Dumas. And from Blue Mountain, I went in the Army. From over there, I was fixing to be drafted. I was helping boys fill out their form to go to the service, so my name was, I felt like it was coming up real soon, so I volunteered to go in the Army, and on August 19th, 1942 is when I left home, and the last thing I told my mother and daddy that I'd be home when the war was over. And so then I went up to Ripley to catch a bus and went to Camp Shelby and stayed at Camp Shelby a couple of days and got different uniforms and got some shots. And then they carried me over to Camp Croft, South Carolina, and I took my basic training over there. They trained us real hard and real fast because they needed men overseas. So when I left after I left Camp Croft, I was going up the East Coast, and I knew then I would be going to the European theater instead of the Pacific. So when I got to Camp Kilmer, they still didn't tell us where we were going, so they put us they carried us over New York Harbor and put us on a ship, and they still didn't tell us where we were going, so we didn't know. But when we went by the Statue of Liberty, it was on the right going out, and so we could see it. And those men who trained with us was standing up there looking at it and was wondering how many of us men who had been trained together, how many will get to see this Statue of Liberty the second time. So we still didn't know where we were going, whether it's England or France or wherever. But anyway, we didn't go to either one of those two places. We wound up in Oran, North Africa, and so the groups that we replaced had already been shot up real bad. So we was replacements. Our company, where the men who trained with us, was our replacements for those people who had been shot up real bad, and they chose me to go in the 805 Tank Destroyer Division. And so we was there was a separate outfit. It was tanks, all the tanks and half tracks. And then we had the ground crew was like infantry, but in our company we had 250 men, had 10 tanks and 13 half tracks, and the rest of us was ground crew because we had been trained as infantry. So General Patton was behind me, and General Patton's son-in-law, Captain Waters, he was on this side, and General Anderson, British, was on our left side, and General Montgomery, British, he was on the right side. And so when I joined the 805, that had been shot up real bad, they give us a different kind of uniform than what we had that they give us in the camp. And so we went up to Fayed Pass, where they had been, before they came out, shot all to pieces. And on the 14th of February, 43, we was shelling them, and they was shelling us, but we wasn't gaining any ground. We just losing men and outfit stuff. And so the orders came down that our company had to be, was going to be sacrificed, said that General Rommel's 7th Panzer Division is ahead of you, and we want them to come through you so that General Anderson and General Montgomery can circle around behind them and cut their supplies off. He said it's kind of like a suicide mission. And so said when the battle is over, each man will be on his own. So sure enough, on the Monday night when the battle was over, they did run through us, and each man was on his own, like they said. And so they started up shooting up flares as it was getting dark. They were shooting them up, and it made a big light like that. It shined down on us. And my uniform looked kind of like this. Kind of is made. When I laid down in the sand, it looks. We was on the edge of the Sahara Desert. So when I lay down, I just looked like a pile of sand out there. So I could see that thing going up. And so before it busted out in light, I would lay down on the ground and face down. Then when it got dark again, I'd get up and go again. And so I traveled all night like that. Sometime next morning before about daylight, I found me a slit trench and had cover on it. So I climbed down in there, and then I pulled a cactus up over me to make it look like just like a pile of cactus. So I thought, well, when night gets dark again, I'll go again tonight. But so next morning, I saw my cover begin to move. My heart started pounding. I just knew I was fixing to get killed because I thought that was German soldiers coming. And when I looked up, it wasn't a German, it was an Arab. He had that white band around his head and a long white sheet-looking thing hanging behind him. And he said, Mojo, Mojo. And so I said, man, he's going to bring me food and water, and I'm going to have it made. So he said, he just motioned me to stay put, so I did. My heart kind of calmed down. Then just in it wasn't very long till I heard some action going on. And so then 12 German soldiers with the helmets on and the bayonets fixed, all of them come in and they pointed the gun to me, and one of them hollered, Arfstein. And so I didn't know what that Arfstein meant, but I knew he didn't want me to stay down in there, so I climbed out. And that Arab just still standing there. And so this German, he could speak half English and half German. And so he says, first thing he said, I don't hate you, but says if I don't fight, they will cut my head off and kill my whole family. He was about 21 years old, about the same age as me at the time. And he says, they'll kill my whole family if I don't. But anyway, this little Arab is still standing there. So directly he looked at that Arab and he ran his hand in his pocket and pulled out 200 francs. And the 200 francs is equivalent to $1 at that time. I'd have given him $2 if he hadn't turned me in. So then that old Arab started pacing off like that. And that German saw that it made me mad. I don't know. That's the maddest I've ever been in my whole life. And so that German held his gun up and said, if I give you my gun, which one would you shoot first, him or me? And I latched onto it. I just knew I was going to die anyways. And so I was going to kill that Arab. I kept pulling and he kept pulling, and I heard the gun start backing the hammers behind me, so I let go. He said, yeah, then he nicks good. He's two-faced. Says, when you're winning, he works for you, and when we're winning, he works for us. He said, Nick's good, no good. And so then he didn't search me at that time out there, but I lost my freedom. And that's what 400,000 young men died for our freedom. And I lost it right there. But he didn't search me. So we went on up to a little road where the Arabs had gathered up a lot of other GIs out of our company, and they got all the information on our dog tags. And so after they got mine, I just stepped out that edge of the road and a command car, and I looked in there in the back seat, and there's old General Rommel just looking right up at me, smiling. And I thought, man, you done bit off more than you can chew. They're going to circle you and bust your water tank. Anyway, I didn't salute him or I didn't spit on him. So anyway, I went back up with the rest of the boys, and they said that we had to walk. They didn't have transportation to carry us. So they said that if you escape and we don't catch you, we're going to kill 10 of your comrades. if we catch you escaping, we're going to shoot you. And if you're walking and you fall out and you can't go, we're going to shoot you because we don't have transportation to carry you. So when they got us all, and then they gave me a half a canteen cup of sauerkraut soup. And so that was on Tuesday morning. And so they said that let's go, let's line up. And we had to walk in formation. And then when we started, and they had a machine gun in front and a machine gun behind and a guard every 10 feet on each side of us. And they said, if you fall out, we're going to shoot you. So anyway, we started marching and found out we was walking. We'd walk 4 hours and rest 10 minutes. 4 hours and rest 10 minutes. And we did that from then one of the, not long, maybe the second day, this one of the boys right in front of me just fell flat on his face. And I reached down and got him, told him, let's go, they'll shoot you. And so that was the hardest thing that happened to me while I was over there. I had to turn him loose, knowing that he would die when I left, and I've never seen him since. I'm sure they did what they said they'd do, they'd shoot him if he fell out, but I never saw him again. So then we marched like that from Tuesday till Saturday afternoon. We walked into Tunis, North Africa. We had water 3 different times from Tuesday till Saturday afternoon, and we didn't get anything else to eat from Tuesday morning when we had our sauerkraut soup till Saturday afternoon when we got into Tunis, North Africa. They had that old German bread as a loaf about that long and about that square. Crust is about as thick as my finger. And so they cut that thing in 16 slices. They lined up 16 men, and then they put it 16 slices. They brought out a pound of what they call bully beef. We call it corned beef hash. And they cut that pound in 16 slices and give each one of us a sandwich of that bully beef, and that was our meal for the day. And then the next morning, we slept in a barn. We was in a lot, and there was a trough out there that had water where they'd watered their horses. So when we got there, we just dove in on our head and was drinking that water where the horses were drinking. And so some of them drank so much water that they passed out. And I was lucky I didn't pass out. And so then next morning they brought us a bowl of soup. It is I don't know, it's some kind of vegetable soup, but mostly water and no meat in it. And anyway, they had a little slice of bread. That was our meal. I guess it's 9 o'clock in the morning. And then that afternoon, just sometime before the sun went down, they brought us another little bowl of soup and another little piece of bread, and that was our meal for the day. And we stayed there a couple of days, and they didn't have ships to carry us across the Mediterranean Sea. See, Tunis was right on the Mediterranean Sea, and then Italy was on the other side of that. And they didn't have ships to carry us. They was afraid of, and so they put us on an airplane that had a Ju-52. It had a big engine in the middle and a small engine on each wing. And they put 14 men on that one plane. And the plane I was on, we was going to Naples, Italy. And so when we get up in the air, the pilot called back to the guard and said that they couldn't land in Naples. They was going to have to land in somewhere else. So they landed in Italy, in Sicily, the little island between North Africa and Italy is Sicily. So we landed there, and then they put us in a little ferry boat and carried us on over to Italy. And then when we got over to Italy, we walked all the way from, well, there's only 14 of us, as one is on the thing, we was together. And we walked on up to Naples, and when we first got on in the city right next to the water, they was throwing rocks at us and sticks and cussing us. And so that didn't make us too happy with the Italians. They was fighting us in North Africa anyway, so the civilian Italians didn't like us either. So anyway, we walked on past that and then walked on up to Naples. And there's a prison camp there that they had made for the British. See, the British had been fighting them 2 or 3 years before we got there. And so they put us in with them. And then a few days later, I don't know, 2 or 3 days later, they put us on a boxcar, and the boxcar was called 40 and 8. In 1921, when the First World War, when they was fighting over there, the Germans pulled their guns on wheels with horses, and they would put 8 horses on that boxcar and 40 men, and that's where it got its name, is 40 and 8. So they put us in there so thick that when I couldn't squat out, because when I started bending my knees, I'd hit the other fella in front of me, so we had to stand up. As long as you get in and close the door, then that's how you stayed in there. So we started going, and the train didn't go very fast, and it'd just make stops at different places. So we stayed on that boxcar for 7 days and nights from Naples, Italy. And then the night we went through Rome, Italy, they stopped us on the yards and pulled their engine away from us and just left us stay right on the yards. And they told us if anybody bombed the yards that night that they would hit us. And the Lord was looking after us. He didn't let a bomb drop on the course that night, but I found out later that the next night the yards had just bombed all to pieces. So then we got on into Mooseburg. It's at Stalag 7A, and so we got a dog tag with a numbers and name on it, and then my number is 110607, and so I didn't bring it home with me. So anyway, we stayed there for a day or two, and then they started scattering us out to different camps. And so my camp was Stalag 3B. You can see it on that map. It's on the Oder River. The Oder River was between Germany and Poland. You could look across the river and see Poland over there. And so after you was there 30 days, you lose a third of your body weight. And so they said if we'd volunteer and go to a work camp, the food would be better and the work would be real light. And they had lied to us so many times that we knew it was a lie, but it sounded so good, it sounded like the truth, and we fell for it. And so next morning when we went to the slave camp, and next morning they didn't give us any breakfast, but they come and woke us up before daylight and told us we had to go to work. So we was doing construction work and shovel work, cement, pouring and all that stuff. Everything was manpower. No machinery to backhoes or nothing like that. Everything seemed. So then instead, we didn't get any breakfast. We did have cold water. We had a little spigot where we could get our water. And so they had to walk about maybe a half a mile or 3/4 from our camp to where we worked. And so where we slept, there was like that size of a bedroom, and there was 2 men on the end and 2 over here and 2 over here in a little room. It wasn't as big as this room. It was maybe nearly 2/3. Anyway, there was 6 of us in there, and so we would have to walk in before daylight. And when we got to camp down there where we was working, it was still dark. You couldn't see what you was doing. They wouldn't let us sit down and rest till it got daylight to where we could see. They'd make us stand up instead of sitting down, so we had to stand up all day. And so then at lunchtime, they give us a little bowl of soup and a little square of bread. And then that afternoon, we got the same kind of soup and the same amount of it, and a little slice of bread. And this time they had a boiled potato. If it was so small, it'd be two, or it'd be one larger potato. That would be our meal till next day for lunch. And then they would walk us back to camp. And then after about a year and 23 days, a boy named Honeycutt and I decided we couldn't handle it much longer in this slave camp. It was too less food and too hard work and too long work. We would work 14 days in a row, and then we could get one day off, and then start over again, and we was working from daylight to dark. So I don't know how much weight I'd lost down to, but we was kind of strong because we kept moving, had to keep exercising. And so a boy named T.T. Honeycutt, Tafford T. Honeycutt, he finished Duke College in North Carolina, so he and I decided that if we could escape, then we could maybe get back to the Americans. And so we said, well, tell the escape committee that we want to go, and then if they could find somebody that would take care of us or help us along, then we would go. So this escape committee was so secret. They had contact with the French underground, but it's so secret I don't even know how they did it yet. I don't know. But anyway, they found a family in Prague, Czechoslovakia. I showed him a map on it a while ago. That's where the man and his family was going to take care of two men, and then help them on. And so they saved up a loaf of bread, those little hard loaf of bread. Each one of us had one apiece, and when we went out the gate, we had it on our arm, and it's before daylight, and the guard didn't see it, so that's what we had to start with on Monday morning. And then we went down to where we was working, was building construction, and they was up there like that, and the braces across there. We found a plank and laid over there, and we laid there all day long without sneezing or coughing or talking, because they was working just outside the wood. And so at that night, when our group went up, we were still up there, and then so they had guards, a gardener where we was working, they had guards around us, and there was two guards down there, and they was going like this, guarding. They wasn't supposed to be going like that, they were supposed to be going like this. So we crawled down, there's a wheat field right beside them, and they had a path about 3 feet wide, and the wheat is about that high, about 30 inches high. So we went down where they come together, and not close enough they could see us. And so when they was come together, when they turned to leave, just before they turned to come back, we crawled across their path and then crawled down through that wheat field for long enough that we could stand up and they couldn't see us. So that's how we got away. And so then that's on a Monday. And then we would sleep in the daytime and travel at night. We was following this river. They had had us a map to follow, and we studied that map and then destroyed it because we didn't want, maybe if we got caught, and then they'd send that map, they'd follow and kill the family that was going to take care of us. So we followed this Ebb River, and the Ebb River run into the Oder River down close to Prague, and then ran into big body of water. So it was easy to follow that, but what we had when we got to Prague, that's where we had to memorize the streets and numbers and so forth. Anyway, we on Saturday afternoon, we walked into Prague, Czechoslovakia, and we was out of food. That lunch, we had our last little piece of bread, and so we was going to be at this family's house, and by the time the next meal was due. So anyway, we was ahead of the schedule, and so we was going to, if we couldn't get there 1 minute before or 1 minute after 10 o'clock. If we'd got one before or after, the family was said, they've caught you and they've got your clothes, and it might be a German, it'd kill a whole family. So we had to be right on the thing. And Honeycutt had a watch. I don't know how he got it, but anyway, he had one. And so we was ahead of schedules, and when we was in this road going towards the place where we were going, there's a little bunch of pine trees there, and we climbed down under those little pine trees, and laying down was going to kill some time. And so while we was there, I know I went to sleep because I was so tired and sleepy. And I'm sure Honeycutt did too. So the first thing I knew, I heard a loud voice holler, "Arstein!" And so I was so disappointed. I knew I'd messed up by going in there and didn't look behind us. And so there stood two big Germans with something like our forest ranger uniform, and each one of them had a double-barrel shotgun and had a German Shepherd dog apiece. And when he hollered, both of us got up and just stood side by side and just looking at them. They was looking at us. The dog was calm and the guns was down. And then he asked us, says, "Are you British?" We just shook our head. "Are you Russian?" Every time they'd ask us, anybody who we were, they never did ask us, "Are we Americans?" And so finally one of them let out a cuss word and says, "Who are you then?" And so both of us says, "Americanos." And when we did that, the dogs started showing their teeth, the guns came up. We just thought any minute we'd gonna get a loaded block shot. And so after that, they said, "Los, let's go." And so they marched us down into the little road where we left. And then we went on towards town. And so they had something like a smokehouse that had bars across the center, big bars across the center, and then had the bars in the center and the back. Then they had doors on each side of this. So they took all their clothes off of us, and we had our underwear on, they had them on, and they put us both in this one side. Instead of putting us separate, they put us both in there, and then the guard left. And so that night it began to get cold, and our lips started turning blue, and we was really getting really cold. And there was a little old seat in the back of the thing, and I said, "Honeycutt, I'm going to sit down. You sit down in my lap, and I'm going to bend over, and then you bend over me, and the one maybe on the inside can maybe stay warm." And we tried it, and it worked real good. So all night long, that's what we did to stay warm. If they'd have separated us, we'd have froze to death by there. And so the next morning, the lady of the house came in and saw us stand there. She says, "You boys about to freeze to death." And she grabbed our clothes and threw them in there and says, "Don't mind me, I've seen men without clothes on before." So she turned and left. In about 10 minutes here, she come with a slice of civilian bread and a pitcher of chicory, like our coffee. It was hot and wet. And so she gave that to us and we had our clothes on, and we'd drink that hot chicory and eat that slice of bread. And then about up in the morning, here she come again with another big piece of loaf of bread and a boiled egg apiece and a boiled potato apiece. And so we had plenty of water. And so after that, it started warming up in the day, and we started getting warmer and felt good. And so this lady said, she was sending back, but she had a daughter about 14, 15 years old, and then they had a son about 12. And so now this is on Sunday, the 30th of May, 1944. And so the lady, the daughter, went downtown and bought about 10 or 12 other girls about her age, maybe 15 to 19 years old, and they brought us outside of the bars and put us on the inside, and there's a guard outside, and those girls came in and lined up around the side, and little lady about 60 years old, she was real small. It's the way Steve talked about his mother. It looked about like her size, short lady. And so they lined up, and she was over there, and I was here, and the lady of the house here, and the honeycutt was on the other side of her. And so they was asking us question after question. And I know you can't guess what the first question was, because I'm not going to wait till you let you guess. But the first question is, everybody in the United States gangsters? That was the number one question. And the number two question is the Empire State Building as tall as they say it is? I didn't know how tall that thing was. So I said, how high did they say it was? They said it was 117 stories high. They said, well, if they said that's how high it was, that's how high it is. So they didn't do nothing about it. So directly it kind of got quiet. And this little lady that's over here, she eased up beside me and put her shoulder against mine and looked up at me and says, which one you think the best looking, them or me? I put my arm around her. I said, I think you're the best looking. They got a kick out of that. And then when the girls had to leave, they didn't just walk right out. They walked out in front of us and looked face to face and told us Auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. And so we knew then that they didn't hate us. They had never seen American before, but they wasn't afraid of us and didn't hate us. So that made us feel a little bit better. So then each one of them said that, and then they left. Next morning, on Tuesday morning, the Army came in and got us. And we were so far away from Stalag 3B, where we had left them start with, that we spent one night with the British. On our way, there's a British camp, and we sprayed in a British POW camp, and they fed us the best they could. And the next day, on Wednesday, we carried us on down to and got into Stalag 3B, where we had left to start with. And so the colonel, Honeycutt and I had already made up our mind where we knew if they called us, they was going to ask us where we were going, and we was going to tell them that we was going to Switzerland. And so then, sure enough, that was one of the first questions that old colonel asked us. Said, where were you going? And we said, well, we was going to Switzerland. Switzerland is this way, and we was going this way. He said, yeah. He could speak perfect English. And so he says, after he said, I got to congratulate you. He said, you just come and eat, you're getting away. He says, if we don't want people to leave here, they don't leave. So then, he said, I've got to punish you. If I don't punish you, they will kill me or make me do the punishment I'm going to have to give you. So he said, come on, follow me. So we went down a little hall down there, and there's some little dungeons down there, and Honeycutt went in the first one. And so then they were going to put me in the second. They put me in there. They thought they would put me in there by myself, but I wasn't going in by. Jesus went in ahead of me. And so after 2 or 3 days and nights in there, it is so quiet. It is completely silent and completely dark. And so that was the hardest part of it, is being so quiet and dark. But then I began to think of what my mother and daddy going to think if they find out that I died in a dungeon when I shouldn't have been in a dungeon to start with. So anyway, I was thinking about if I die in here. And then I don't know how the old devil got in there. He says, your mother and daddy don't love you. Nobody loves you. Germans never going to let you out of here. Why don't you just lay back and die? You don't have far to go. So Jesus says, what'd you tell your mother and daddy when you left home? I said, well, I told them I'd be home when the war's over. I just got new strength. I didn't want to die anymore. I didn't think about dying anymore. So then when they came and got me, I had a pitcher from water, had aluminum, and that aluminum would make a mark on concrete. So every day when I realized it's dark, I would make a mark. So when they came and got me, I counted my marks, and I had 21 marks on there. So then we went around to where the other boys were at, where in Stalag 3B, where I was in the beginning. And so about 20 of those sailor boys, those Army boys, well, it was all Army, but those boys would line up, and when they get the little ration of bread, they would take a pinch of bread and there'd be 20 of them, and give them each one of us a pinch of their bread, which made up us another little ration of bread. So it helped us real good. And then we if you ever sat down and stopped walking, you was in trouble. So with this compound, everybody walked around the compound. They had the path around it. And so we would walk first day we walked as far as we thought we could go, and then turn around and come back. And then the next day we'd go a little further and come back. And after 14 days, we got to where we could walk around the old compound. And then the boys quit sharing their bread with us at that time. And so then that was on June the 25th when I got out of there. Then from June the 25th till just before Christmas, we heard the Russians, we heard firearm, big guns, and then we started hearing little guns. Then on January the 29th, 45, they came in and got us and told us that we was going to have to start marching west, that the Russians was, we knew that there was a Russian coming, so they said, get all your belongings. So snow was about half knee deep, and temperature was about 17 degrees at that time. So we started marching west, and we didn't have a house or a barn to sleep in, so we just huddled together real close as we could, and we slept on the snow. And so then after 2-3 days, the snow turned to slush, and then it turned to water. Then we finally walked out of it. And on February the 14th, which we marched into Luckenwalde, and so that's Stalag 3A, and so a lot of the Americans is already there, and they put us in tents with about 30 feet wide, about 50 feet long, and we had to sleep on the ground. They had straw, and we would sleep together. You had partners, and if you could sleep off your back, but he had to sleep on his side. We couldn't sleep side by side. One of us had to sleep on our side. We was that close to keep warm, and so then on April the 9th, the Russians caught up with us again, and so the German guards just left. They just left. And one young German soldier, even though he was my enemy, I felt sorry for him. He had been our guard, and he brought his wife and little boy, about 10 or 12 years old, up there. Everything they had it on their back. And he was crying and wanted us to take them as POW prisoners. And he said, if you can, take me too. And so we didn't, and we couldn't, and we didn't. So I don't know whether they lived through the day or not. There was be about 6 P-47 fighter pilots. Russians were flying them, and they would come over, and the road was just full of refugees. And they would come over and line up behind each other and strafe the yard and then go back like that. It looked like a big wheel going backwards until they run out of ammunition. And then when they run out and they was leaving, they would come right over us and turn up on their side and salute us. And they knew we was down there. And anyway, they was strafing, and that's what I say. I don't know whether that man and his wife and boy lived through the day or not. The roads were so full of mines that the Americans couldn't come in and get us, so the engineers had to clear the roads of mines. So when they did on the April the 21st, is the truck I got on. We had 6x6s without a cover on it. You just climbed over in there and stand up. So on the 21st, I got on this truck and was going was going west. And then when I crossed that Ebb River, the Americans was waiting for us over there. And so when I crossed that river, I got my freedom back. That was one of the most happiest time of my life, one of the time. And then I had the clothes on that I'd got caught in, and they were so dirty they nearly stunned alone. But they had us to pull them all. I had my class ring on and my dog tags on, and everybody was on that truck pulled all their clothes on, even the shoes, and put them on that fire. They had a big bonfire, and they was burning our clothes. And all of us was covered with lice. We'd sleeping on the straw in that tent. And so we was completely covered with lice. And so we thought we was going to get a good hot shower in this building here. So we went in there and looked up. Instead of water coming out of those spigots is DDT, stuff we used to kill boll weevils with. And they sprayed it with us, and we would rub wherever we thought the lice was. We'd rub and stayed in there about 15 minutes. And then we went to the next room and really got us a good shower then. Then in the next room, we got our uniform. One size fits all. If it's this big, you just lapped them over. But anyway, they give us all then, and then there was 2 C-46, one C-46, one C-47 planes that the pilot had been letting people jump out of, the paratroopers. Anyway, they had 2 that didn't have seats; they just had the floor, and so there was the plane I got on when I felt it go down the runway. When I felt it lift off, I said I could say goodbye to the country that had my freedom for 26 months, worked me from daylight to dark on a starvation diet. I'm going home. And that plane pulled it out and they carried us over to Le Havre, France. And he said, the pilot called me and said, I'm going to show you what the Air Force and Navy's done. So he's pulled out over the harbor. He said, look down to your left. And we could look down there and said, that Le Havre, France didn't look like there was a brick that hadn't been turned over. And then he went on and landed, and we caught a little bus and went back up to Stalag it's a Camp Lucky Strike, and they had 6,800 tents set up for incoming POWs. There was 143,000 POWs in Germany at one time. There was 90,000 Air Force. Then on May the 4th, they called my name to go home, and so they said, step up on the scale. So I stepped up on her and glanced down, and I weighed 120 pounds. And he looked kind of funny. He says, we can't send you home looking like that. He says, you got to stay with us a while. So the next morning I got my biscuit and everything and went through breakfast. Then they had a barrel of eggnog, about a 55-gallon drum of eggnog made up there. So I ate my breakfast, then I got in line. There's a lot of them like me, they couldn't go home, so we got in that line to get us some eggnog. So when we got our eggnog and drank it, it was time for lunch then, so we lined up for lunch then. We got our lunch. Then after we got through that, then we lined up again to go get us some more eggnog. And so we did that and got her. And when we got that through, it was time to line up for supper again. So we got our supper, went to the bathroom, and went to bed. And so for 30 days and nights, that was my routine. I would eat and sleep. June the 4th, they called me back again, and they said, step back up on that. So they did. I looked down. I weighed 150 pounds. They said, man, you look fat. Now we're going to send you home. So in the morning, get your stuff. We're going to carry you down to the ship. There's a ship waiting for you. So on the June, and those sailor boys, they took care of us. I was so hungry for something sweet or chocolate. And there's a Red Cross had a little booth set up, and I saw a payday candy bar there, and I just been paid, first time I'd been paid in 30 months. I got a partial pay of $15. So when I got on there, I spied that payday. I went over and I got it, and I didn't know how much it's a girl taking care of it. I don't know how much she's going to charge me. So I asked her, she said 25 cents. And this little sailor boy behind me, I glanced around at him. He was red in the face. I thought I'd made him mad or something. And he says, so I went up there and got that thing for 25 cents. He said, you got any more money? I said, yeah. So I gave him a quarter. He went up there and told that girl he wanted a quarter's worth of candy. She reached over and got him 6 bars and brought him back and said, here's you some candy. Says, anything you want now, you just tell us and we'll get it for you. So I'd like to shake that boy's hand today and say thank you. It's on the 5th of June, 45, that afternoon we started sailing out to New York. So on the December the 10th, we sailed into New York Harbor, and before we got in, he'd cut his engines back, and we could see that big Statue of Liberty is getting late in the afternoon. We could see the light on it. And so it was on our left this time. The first time is on our right. So, you know that the Statue of Liberty talks. Whatever it said to you, that's what it said. Whatever it said to me, that's what it said. So anyway, that night they wouldn't let us off. We had to spend the night on the ship. And the next morning we got out, and they carried us over to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, the same camp that we left from to start with. And we got a haircut. First time I'd ever had a haircut by a woman. My daddy always cut my hair, and then when I was at camp, I didn't get many haircuts. So then we got on a troop train, and they had boxcars. There's 65 of us Mississippi boys, and they had different states. They was in their car. So if we're coming down south, if you was like North Carolina, for instance, they would cut that loose and turn it towards that, and we was still coming towards Camp Shelby. And so we was coming down through, and we got down to Walnut, Mississippi, and I recognized where I was, and a boy named James Brown and Carl Adair was with me. Carl married a girl at Faulkner, and then James lived at Ripley, and so then I lived on down at Blue Mountain. So anyway, I'd written a note on the drinking cup and I was going through it in the post office when I went through Blue Mountain. It's just right there, and let Mr. Tapp take care of it. So anyway, when we got to Blue Mountain, there was a water tank there where they watered up their trains. And so it was about midnight, I think. And so I heard a voice hollering, "Anybody on here from Tipper County?" And when I heard it, I recognized his voice as Mr. Pearl Henry. So then I give him my note, and he went up to where my mother and daddy lived, and Papa said he thought he was somebody tearing the front screen door off his house. Mr. Pearl had brought that note up there and said he'd talk to me, and on the note I said I'd be back in a day or two. So anyway, the lieutenant was in charge of us. He says, "Now I know this is your hometown, and I advise you not to jump off, but if you are going to jump off, I'll turn my back." So I said, "No, I'll stay with them. I'll stay this long. I can stay another 2 or 3 days." So anyway, we went on down to Camp Shelby, and we got all that black stuff off of us that we had to open the windows to let them smoke coal burner trains, and we was black. Anyway, they give us new uniform, and they give us a bath and give us another partial pay, and next morning or two we got on a bus and headed up 15 Highway. In nearly every town there'd be a boy getting off, so Blue Mountain was next to Ripley was the last stop. I was at Blue Mountain. So when I got up to Blue Mountain, when I stepped to the door, everybody that was there they would go, if you was a serviceman, whoever you was, they would just gather around you. So when they gathered around and saw it was me, they knew me because they'd seen me play basketball in the gym before I finished. And so then Mr. Earl Hall, he had 4 boys, and there's 4 boys in our family, but they was born nearly the same like. And so he says, if I wanted to walk, I didn't want to ride, so he says, well, if I can't put you in my car, I'm going to walk with you. So my mother and daddy live about 1.5 miles from the depot was. About halfway up there, he looked over and says, Earl I knew who Earl was, his son. He said, Earl got killed on December the 17th, 1944 in the Battle of the Bulls, and I'd seen so much death, it didn't hit me. It didn't worry me, think too much about it at the time. But when we got inside the house, Papa saw us, and here he come. And he grabbed me, and he held, and we wasn't talking. And we started crying. At that time, I glanced over at Mr. Earl, and he was crying. And so he was crying for different reasons than what I was crying for. Then we walked on up to the house, and my mama and 2 nephews standing on the front porch. And when she grabbed me, if you've never been hugged by your mother, you've never been hugged. And both of them grabbing and holding me, and we was crying, not saying a word. And I glanced over at Mr. Will, and it hit me that I never get to see Earl again. And so then we just kept holding and crying, and finally Mama says, I'm sure glad you're home. That kind of broke the ice. And then I says, it's as bad as it was, Jesus never let me suffer more than I could stand. And as bad as it was, we would do it again for our freedom.